System, Part A. The heart. Overview. Define and distinguish between the pulmonary and systemic circuits. Describe the general location, size, and shape of the heart. And describe the pericardial sac that encloses the heart. Circulatory system, Part A. The cardiovascular system is the heart and blood vessels. The circulatory system is the heart, blood vessels, and the blood. The major divisions of the circulatory system are the pulmonary circuit, which is the right side of the heart, and it carries the blood to the lungs for gas exchange and back to heart, and the systemic circuit, which is the left side of the heart. It supplies oxygenated blood to all tissues of the body and returns it to the heart. On the left side of the heart, fully oxygenated blood arrives from the lungs via the pulmonary veins, and the blood is then sent to all organs of the body via the aorta. On the right side of the heart, lesser oxygenated blood arrives from the inferior and superior vena cava, and the blood is sent to lungs via pulmonary trunk. The heart is located in the mediastinum, between the lungs. The base of the heart is wide, and the blood vessels are attached there. The apex is at the inferior end, and it tilts to the left, tapers to a point. Gross anatomy of the heart. Describe the 3 layers of the heart, identify the 4 chambers of the heart, identify the surface features of the heart, and correlate them with its internal 4-chambered anatomy. Identify the 4 valves of the heart, trace the blood flow through the 4 chambers and valves of the heart and adjacent blood vessels, and describe the arteries that nourish the myocardium and the veins that drain it. The heart wall is made up of the pericardium, which is a double-walled sac or pericardial sac that encloses the heart. It allows the heart to beat without friction and provides room for the heart to expand, yet it resists excessive expansion. It is anchored to the diaphragm inferiorly and the sternum anteriorly. The parietal pericardium is the outer wall of sac, and it is superficial fibrous layer of connective tissue with a deep, thin serous layer. The visceral pericardium, or the epicardium, is the heart covering. The serous lining of the sac turns inward at the base of the heart to cover the heart surface. The pericardial cavity, or the space inside the pericardial sac, is filled with 5 to 30 milliliters of pericardial fluid. And when there's inflammation of these membranes, it's called pericarditis, and that's painful friction rub with each heartbeat. Here's the pericardium and the heart wall. The pericardial cavity consists of the pericardial sac, which is the fibrous layer, the serous layer, and the epicardium. The muscle of the heart is the myocardium, myo for muscle. And the endocardium is the internal lining. It is made up of simple squamous cells, just like the epicardium, and is continuous with the great vessels. Take a moment to study this picture. Here's a picture of a human cadaver heart. Note the fat in the intraventricular sulcus. Again, both epicardium and endocardium are simple squamous epithelium. The epicardium is the serous membrane covering the heart, and it has fat or adipose in thick layer in some places. Coronary blood vessels travel through the epicardium. The endocardium is the smooth inner lining of heart and blood vessels. It covers the valve surfaces and is continuous with the endothelium of blood vessels. The myocardium is the layer of cardiac muscle proportional to workload, and the muscle spirals around the heart, which produces a ringing motion, kind of like a wringing out a towel. The fibroskeleton of the heart provides structural support and attachment for cardiac muscle and an anchor for valve tissue. And it also provides electrical insulation between atria and ventricles, which is important in the timing and coordination of contractile activity. There's 4 chambers to the heart: the right and the left atria, which are the 2 superior or chambers at the top, and they receive the blood returning to the heart. The auricles, which are seen on the surface of the heart, enlarge the chamber. The right and left ventricles, or the bottom half of the heart, are the 2 inferior chambers, and they pump blood into arteries. Some important parts of the heart anatomy to know is the atrioventricular sulcus, which separates the atria and the ventricles. So it separates the right and the left. Top and the bottom. And the intraventricular sulcus overlies the intraventricular septum, and it divides right ventricle from left. And the sulci contain coronary arteries. Note in this picture the ligamentum arteriosum, which attaches the pulmonary trunk to the aortic arch. This is a remnant of the fetal connection between aorta and pulmonary trunk. Here's a posterior view of the chambers. Notice the aorta at the top, the left pulmonary artery, which goes left to right, and the right pulmonary artery on the right. The superior vena cava is on the top, and inferior vena cava is on the bottom of a vein running from top to bottom. Right pulmonary veins and left pulmonary veins. Notice the coronary sulcus and the coronary sinus. And the posterior intraventricular sulcus. And notice that the right ventricle is much smaller than the left ventricle. Some important parts of the chambers that you should know. The intraatrial septum is the wall that separates the atria. Pectinate muscles are internal ridges of myocardium in the right atrium and in both auricles. The intraventricular septum is the wall that separates the ventricles. And the trabeculae carnae are internal ridges in both ventricles. It is thought that the internal ridges of the trabeculae carnae kept the ventricular walls from clinging to each other like suction cups when the heart contracts, allowing the chambers to expand more easily when they refill. Kind of like if you wet your hands and press them palms firmly together, then pull them apart. You can appreciate how smooth wet surfaces cling to each other. And without the trabeculae carnae, the heart walls might do also. Here's a picture of the chambers. Note the trabeculae carnae and the fossa ovalis, which is another remnant. It's a remnant of the foramen ovale of the fetal heart, which is a hole in the interatrial septum that allows blood to flow from the right atrium to the left atrium. The valves. The valves ensure a one-way flow of blood through the heart. The AV, or the atrioventricular valves, control blood flow between atria and ventricles. The right AV valve has 3 cusps, tricuspid. The left has 2, mitral or bicuspid. The chordae tendineae connect the AV valves to papillary muscles on the floor of ventricles, which prevents the AV valves from flipping inside out or bulging into the atria when the ventricles contract. The semilunar valves control flow into great arteries, and they open and close because of blood flow and pressure. The pulmonary semilunar valve is in the opening between right ventricle and pulmonary trunk, and the aortic semilunar valve is the opening in between left ventricle and aorta. Notice the tendinous cords connecting the papillary muscles. When blood flows through the chambers, the ventricles relax. The pressure drops inside the ventricles. The semilunar valves close as blood attempts to back up into the ventricles from the vessels. The AV valves open, and blood flows from the atria to the ventricles. Then the ventricles contract. The AV valves close as blood attempts to back up into the atria. Pressure rises in the ventricles. Semilunar valves open and blood flows. Blood flow through the chamber. Blood enters the right atrium from the superior and inferior vena cava and the coronary sinus. In the right atrium is pectinate muscle, which is ridges of muscle to reduce surface tension so the atria can pull apart, and also ovulus, that vestigial remnant of the foraminal valve. From the right atrium, it goes into the right AV valve, or the tricuspid valve, into the right ventricle, which is lined with trabeculae carinae. The right ventricle contracts, forcing the pulmonary valve or the semilunar valve to open. The blood flows through the pulmonary valve into the pulmonary trunk. The blood is then distributed by right and left pulmonary arteries to the lungs, where it unloads CO2 and loads O2. Then the blood enters the pulmonary veins to return to the left atrium. From the left atrium, it flows into the left AV valve, or bicuspid valve, into the left ventricle. And the contraction of the left ventricle, along with the contraction of the right ventricle, forces the aortic valve open. Blood flows through the aortic valve into the aorta. The blood in the aorta is distributed to every organ in the body, where it unloads O2 and loads C2, CO2, and the blood immediately after the aorta leaves the left ventricle, it gives off a right and left coronary artery. The left coronary artery travels through the coronary sulcus under the left auricle and divides into 2 branches. The anterior intraventricular branch travels down the anterior intraventricular sulcus to the apex, rounds the bend, and travels a short distance up to the posterior side. There it joins the posterior intraventricular branch. It is also called the LAD, or left anterior descending branch. It supplies blood to ventricles and anterior 2/3 of the intraventricular septum. The circumflex branch continues around the left side of the heart in the coronary sulcus. It gives off a left marginal branch that passes down the left margin of the heart and furnishes blood to the left ventricle. The circumflex branch then ends on the posterior side of the heart. It supplies blood to the left atrium and posterior wall of the left ventricle. The right coronary artery supplies the right atrium and sinoatrial node, continues along the coronary sulcus under the right auricle, and gives off two branches of its own. The right marginal branch runs towards the apex of the heart and supplies the lateral aspect of the right atrium and ventricle. The RCA, or right coronary artery, continues around the right margin of the heart to the posterior side, sends a small branch to the atrioventricular node, then gives off a large posterior intraventricular branch. The branch travels down the corresponding sulcus and supplies the posterior walls of both ventricles, as well as the posterior portion of the intraventricular septum. It ends by joining the anterior intraventricular branch of the LCA.